welcome to Inspirations by Dr. Gail. Today's episode is titled, She Got Mad Enough to Do Something About It. How a survivor of sexual abuse became a warrior against human trafficking. This is the second part of my resiliency series, Making Lemonade Out of Lemons. In this series, I'll share stories and strategies from my own life and the lives of others that explain how each of us has not only been able to keep moving forward during difficult times, but how we used adversity to improve the lives of others through our work. In other words, how we made lemonade out of lemons. In addition to applying this information to your own life, I hope that you'll share the stories and strategies with children, teenagers, and young parents in your network. If you're an educator, please incorporate resiliency stories and strategies into your curriculum on a regular basis because children and teens desperately need this information. Now, let's get into today's topic. She got mad enough to do something about it. How a survivor of sexual abuse became a warrior against human trafficking. Have you ever heard something that was so sad and overwhelming that it made you want to crawl under a rock and hide or get into bed and pull the covers over your head? Well, this happened to me recently. Last month, I had a conversation with a neighbor that left me feeling drained and depressed. This neighbor is a retired law enforcement officer. During our conversation, he began to describe various crimes in the California city in which we live and also in a neighboring city. One of the most troubling problems that he talked about concerned teenagers and young women. According to this man, African American women and girls are being transported from Florida to California and being forced to work as sex slaves. He also said that many of these young women are forced to live in a brothel in that neighboring city. What he said shocked me, and the more he talked, the sicker I felt. After the conversation ended, I remembered another story that I'd been told. During my travels to the Midwest, a professor told me that African American girls as young as 11 years old are being forced to work as prostitutes in a local city. Sadly, sexual abuse of children, teens, and even adults is a widespread problem throughout the world that has existed for centuries. It's also one of the most common causes of adversity and trauma for children and adults. Regarding sexual abuse in the U.S., according to the CDC, or Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, sexual violence affects millions of people each year in the U.S. However, because victims may be ashamed, embarrassed, or afraid to tell the police, friends, or family about the violence, the actual number of victims is much higher. In spite of the fact that many of these crimes are never reported, CDC experts have reached the following conclusions. Quote, sexual violence is common. 1 in 3 women and 1 in 4 men experienced sexual violence during their lifetimes. Sexual violence starts early. 1 in 3 female rape victims experienced it for the first time between ages 11 and 17. And 1 in 8 reported that it occurred before age 10. Nearly 1 in 4 male rape victims experienced it for the first time between ages 11 and 17 years old, and about 1 in 4 reported that it occurred before age 10. Sexual violence can cause many problems for victims. Victims may suffer from post-traumatic stress disorder and experience many other health problems. Sexual violence is also linked to negative health behaviors. For example, victims are more likely to smoke, abuse alcohol, use drugs, and engage in risky sexual activity. The trauma resulting from sexual violence can have an impact on a survivor's employment in terms of time off from work, diminished performance, job loss, or being unable to work. Readjustment after victimization can be challenging. Victims may have difficulty in their personal relationships, in returning to work or school, and in regaining a sense of normalcy. In addition, sexual violence is connected to other forms of violence. For example, girls who have been sexually abused are more likely to experience other forms of violence and additional sexual violence and be a victim of intimate partner violence in adulthood. Unquote. Regarding sex trafficking, CDC experts stated, quote, sex trafficking is a type of human trafficking and is a form of modern-day slavery. It's a serious public health problem that negatively affects the well-being of individuals, families, and communities. Human trafficking occurs when a trafficker exploits an individual with force, fraud, or coercion to make them perform commercial sex or work. Victims can come from all backgrounds and become trapped in different locations and situations. Many victims are women and girls, though men and boys are also impacted. Victims include all races, ethnicities, sexual orientations, gender identities, citizens, non-citizens, and income levels. Victims are trapped and controlled through assault, threats, false promises, perceived sense of protection, isolation, shaming, and debt. Victims do not have to be physically transported between locations to be victimized. Perpetrators of human trafficking often target people who are poor, vulnerable, living in an unsafe situation, or searching for a better life. For example, youth with a history of abuse and neglect, or who are homeless, are more likely to be exploited. Consequences of sexual violence, including sex trafficking, can be immediate and long-term, including physical and relationship problems, psychological problems, and chronic health problems. Unquote. As an empath and highly sensitive person, statistics, news stories, and the information that my neighbor shared with me about sexual abuse can have a huge negative impact on me. But on that day when my neighbor told me about the African American teens and women who were being transported from Florida and forced to live in a local brothel, instead of climbing into bed and giving in to depression, I remembered numerous resiliency stories. For example, I remembered that 2 African American women who I know were also victims of childhood sexual abuse. In spite of this, both became professionally successful and even became published authors. I also remembered the late, great Dr. Maya Angelou. She was raped during childhood and as a result of this trauma became an elective mute. This means that she chose to stop speaking. But over time, she started talking, writing, dancing, and singing. And Dr. Maya Angelou became one of the most successful and famous women in the world. Dr. Angelou wrote many books, including her autobiography, I Know Why, The Caged Bird Sings. She wrote the poem Phenomenal Woman, which is one of the most famous poems ever written, and Dr. Angelou was invited to read one of her poems at President Bill Clinton's inauguration. I was blessed to hear Dr. Angelou speak in person on 2 occasions and was impressed with her courage, candor, feistiness, and brilliance. This victim of an atrocious crime during childhood not only bounced back from adversity, but she became the very type of phenomenal woman that she described in her poem. On that day when my neighbor told me what he did, I also remembered a resiliency story that an elementary school teacher recently told me. During her childhood, her own father repeatedly sexually abused her, but instead of letting his evil deeds destroy her and ruin the rest of her life, she chose to become an advocate for children with special needs. This teacher uses extremely humane social-emotional learning strategies to ensure that her students feel safe and loved in her classroom so that they can learn the academic skills that they need in a nurturing environment. I also thought of Christine Caine. This feisty white minister has a television program that I often watch. When I see her in action, it's hard to believe that she experienced so much adversity during her childhood. Christine was born in Australia and raised by Greek parents. Although she didn't know it for many years, she was actually adopted. Because she was Greek, she was bullied a lot by other children. But the worst part of her childhood was that she was subjected to ongoing sexual abuse. In one of the many interviews she gave, Christine said the following, quote, "I was sexually abused by several men in my life at a very young age. I tried to tell somebody that could have intervened, but 40 years ago in Australia, the word abuse didn't even exist. Nobody talked about that stuff. You walked in the shame of it and you buried it. When you're first abused, you're filled with shame about what is happening to you. When it happens over a long period of time, you then begin to think it's happening because of who you are. So I grew up feeling a lot of rejection, shame, insecurity, fear, and anger. When you're abused, you shut down and think you're used goods. You think God could never really do anything with your life. You can hear 1,000 sermons on destiny and purpose and God having a plan for your life, plans for good and not for evil. But if you come at that with a shame-based nature, then deep down you can never believe God can use you. It's certainly been the fight of my life to get to the place of trusting God to redeem the broken pieces of my past." Unquote. In spite of this traumatic background, over time, like Dr. Maya Angelou, Christine began to heal emotionally and change her beliefs about herself. Instead of blaming herself for the horrible things that happened to her, she realized that it wasn't her fault. Instead, the blame belonged to the predators who took advantage of a vulnerable, innocent child. Instead of spending her life feeling ashamed and that she was damaged, Christine also got mad enough to do something about it. She decided that although she couldn't change what happened to her, she could use her pain, anger, talent, and passion in ways to help other victims. Today, as a wife, mother, and minister, in addition to helping survivors of sexual abuse by sharing her own resiliency story with them through her television ministry, Christine has written books. She has also become a warrior. She founded a women's empowerment ministry called Propel Women, and along with her husband, she co-founded the A21 campaign. Quote, "The A21 campaign is an anti-human trafficking organization dedicated to abolishing injustice in the 21st century. A21's comprehensive approach includes raising awareness, preventing future trafficking, taking legal action, and providing rehabilitation services to survivors." Unquote. Here's the main point that I hope that you'll take away from today's episode. Sexual abuse and human trafficking are horrible. No child, teenager, or adult should ever be subjected to these crimes against humanity. If you have been victimized, I'm so sorry that you experienced something that no one should ever experience. However, like Dr. Maya Angelou, that teacher of special needs children, Christine Caine, and so many other survivors, you can choose to get mad enough to do something positive about the trauma and adversity that you experienced. For this week's Personal Empowerment Challenge, I'll share some suggestions, so please stay tuned. In episode 15, I talked about the importance of being there for ourselves 24 hours each day, 7 days a week, especially during times of adversity. I also explained why we need to create and rely on strategies that'll help us bounce back and keep moving forward to pursue our healthy goals and dreams, regardless of who or what comes against us. This week's Personal Empowerment Challenge is an extension of this work. It consists of 5 main exercises that I hope you'll include in your personal growth journal. If you're new to this podcast, I urge listeners to keep a personal growth journal in order to continue to do this work after listening to each episode. Number 1, explain how you'll become a warrior for yourself. This means empowering yourself and protecting yourself from abusive individuals, including family members, spouses, and dating partners. Here are several related journal exercises that I hope you'll do. If you're currently in an abusive situation, in your journal, please list the steps that you'll take to get out of that situation as quickly as possible. For example, contacting a local rape and sexual abuse crisis hotline is an option that you should consider. If you're a survivor of sexual abuse, create a plan that will help you move forward. This plan may include the following strategies: seeking therapy from a trained professional who is an expert in sexual abuse, reviewing the inner growth work, self-care, self-empowerment, and self-affirming strategies that I've shared in previous episodes and including them in your moving forward plan. Reading resiliency stories about other survivors and adding the strategies that they used to your journal. Number 2, don't enable or protect predators. Dr. Maya Angelou said, when people show you who they are, believe them. Research has shown that sexual predators rarely change. It also shows that most sexual abuse victims are abused by someone whom they know, and often it's a family member, stepfather, or mother's boyfriend. However, in many families and religious organizations, sexual abuse has been allowed to exist and even been passed down from one generation to another because sexual predators have been enabled and protected. For example, several years ago, I read a story about a woman whose brother, a convicted rapist, had recently been released from prison and needed a place to stay. This woman allowed her brother to move into the home that she shared with her beautiful teenage daughter. Shortly after her brother moved in, he attempted to rape his niece and broke her nose when she tried to escape. So being a warrior for yourself includes creating and using strategies to protect yourself and vulnerable individuals in your network from sexually abusive family members, friends, and acquaintances, and that includes folks in the religious organizations who have a history of sexual abuse. In your journal, list the names of dangerous individuals in your network and write at least 3 related strategies that you will use to protect yourself and others from them. Number 3, explain how you'll become a warrior for the children and teens in your network who have been sexually abused. For example, according to the Office on Women's Health, here are some ways that you can help sexual assault victims. Listening and offering comfort, reminding this person that you believe in him or her and believe the stories that he or she is telling you about the abuse. Reinforcing the message that the victim is not at fault. Explaining that it's natural for the victim to experience confusion, have problems remembering what happened, or feel angry, numb, or ashamed. And you can help by asking the victim whether he or she would like for you to go to the hospital, counseling, and or the police station with the victim. Number 4, please include the following resources in your journal and use them for your own empowerment, and please share them with your network. The National Sexual Assault Hotline number is 800-656-4673. The National Center for Victims of Crimes number is 855 484 2846. The National Domestic Violence Hotline number is 800-799-7233. And the National Human Trafficking Hotline's number is 888-373-7888. Number 5. Explain additional ways that you can make lemonade out of lemons. In other words, in your journal, explain how you can use the adversity that you experienced and the information contained in this episode to help yourself and others. For example, if you are a survivor of sexual abuse, although you may not want to share your story publicly like Christine Caine did and Dr. Maya Angelou did, you may want to share it with at least one teenager or other survivor in your network who could benefit from hearing it and learning the strategies that you've used to empower yourself and to move forward. Or you may want to create a piece of artwork, a song, or a poem that emphasizes the importance of bouncing back from adversity because, as I always say, success is the best revenge. Thanks for tuning in today. I hope you'll tune in next time to hear He Told the Truth About the Unspeakable. This is part 3 of my resiliency series, Making Lemonade Out of Lemons. For more information about Inspirations by Gail, LLC, please visit my website, www.drgailthompson.com. That's www.drgailthompson.com. If you haven't already done so, please subscribe to this podcast through my website, or you can do this through my YouTube channel, Inspirations by Gail. And please remember to hit that like button. If you're interested in the theme music for this podcast, please check out music by Aaron Nimbus on iTunes. In the meantime, please remember this. Sexual abuse and human trafficking are horrible. No child, teenager, or adult should ever be subjected to these crimes against humanity. If you've been victimized, I'm so sorry that you experienced something that no one should ever experience. However, like Dr. Maya Angelou, the teacher of special needs children whom I described, Christine Caine, and so many other survivors, you can choose to get mad enough to do something positive about the trauma and adversity that you experienced. Until next time, hugs and blessings. I'm Dr. Gail L. Thompson.